The courtroom was thick with tension as Aurora stood, her smug voice cutting through the silence. "Finally, your house is mine. You never deserved it." She caressed her baby bump as if it were some sort of shield, locking eyes with me victorious. Beside her, my parents clapped softly, their disdain as loud as a shout. I stood there frozen, watching them celebrate a victory they hadn't earned, and then the judge spoke. His voice was calm, but the words he dropped, those words would shatter their world. "My name is Amelia, and in this moment, I would prove to them that silence holds more power than they ever imagined." Have you ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to love you? For as long as I can remember, I was the background character in my family's story. They called me the quiet one, the plain one, the failure. It wasn't just words. It was in the way they looked at me, the way they ignored me as if I didn't even exist. My sister Aurora was always the star of the show, the one everyone adored. She was beautiful, confident, and loud enough to drown out any of my small attempts at being noticed. And in their eyes, she was the only one who mattered. I was just there. But I didn't mind at first. In fact, I thought it was easier to blend into the background unnoticed because that's where they wanted me to be. One of the worst moments of my life, at least one I'll never forget, was at Aurora's wedding. It was the day I truly felt the weight of my invisibility. It wasn't just a wedding. It was a lavish, six-figure affair at one of the city's most exclusive hotels. There were guests everywhere, faces I didn't recognize, and an entire room filled with people who knew nothing about the sweat and tears that went into making this day happen. I wasn't even a bridesmaid. Hell, I wasn't even a part of the bridal party. I wasn't allowed to be a part of that. No. My job was to be the unpaid logistics coordinator, the one who would do all the hard work, while everyone else enjoyed the celebration. While Aurora sipped champagne in the bridal suite, I was stuck hauling 50-pound boxes of floral arrangements up the service elevator. The staff didn't even acknowledge me. I wasn't a guest, a member of the family, just a servant. My dress off the rack and wrinkled from all the bending and lifting was practically invisible against the grandness of it all. I remember walking past Julian, my brother-in-law, as he adjusted his tuxedo, a sneer curling on his lips. He didn't offer to help. Instead, he laughed loud enough for his groomsmen to hear. "Look at you working up a sweat. Try not to ruin the aesthetic, Amelia." I didn't respond. I just kept walking, feeling smaller with every step. But it wasn't the sweat or the exhaustion that hurt the most. It was the humiliation that came later during the reception. After hours of manual labor, when I finally found a moment to sit and eat a roll, my mother showed up. Her grip on my shoulder was tight, her nails digging into my skin. "Oh, honey, no," she cooed like she was doing me a favor. "This table is for VIPs. Why don't you go eat in the kitchen? It's less crowded there." The message was clear. I was less than them always would be. I wasn't family. I wasn't worthy. And yet as I walked to the kitchen, there was a spark inside me. Silent, quiet, but it was there. I wasn't broken. Not yet. But I would remember this. Every cruel word, every dismissive gesture would fuel my fire for what was coming. As the evening wore on, the glitz and glamour of Aurora's wedding began to blur into a haze of exhaustion and quiet resentment. I had spent hours running around trying to make everything perfect for them while they reveled in their own little world. My dress was crumpled, my hair tangled, but no one cared. They didn't need to. My place was behind the scenes where I belonged. I had learned long ago that I was just the invisible one, the one who existed to make their lives easier. never to be seen, never to be heard. But it was in that moment when I found a small, empty table at the back of the room that the sting of it all truly hit me. My body ached, and I just wanted a break, even if it was for only a few minutes. I grabbed a roll from the buffet, intending to sit down, eat, and gather my thoughts. But before I could even settle in, my mother appeared from nowhere. She didn't even give me a moment to breathe. Her hands slammed down onto my shoulder nails, digging through the fabric of my dress like a vice. I looked up at her, and she was smiling that same fake sweetness she used when she wanted to humiliate me in front of others. "Oh, honey, no," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "This table is for VIPs. You know, the people who actually contributed to the registry. You should eat in the kitchen." Her voice had a practiced condescending edge that made my stomach twist. The words stung in a way I couldn't quite describe. It wasn't just the dismissal, it was the quiet, calculated cruelty. She had orchestrated this entire moment using me as a prop to make herself look good in front of the guests. I glanced around at the table full of strangers, watching me as if I were some kind of servant. The shame was overwhelming. The hunger in my stomach turned cold, replaced by something darker. It wasn't just about being excluded. It was about being made to feel less than. Less than the guests, less than the VIPs, less than the family they all worshipped. I had always been the one pushed aside, the one who wasn't worthy of their time or attention. I was the background, the shadow, but in that moment, I felt the weight of my own existence in a way I hadn't before. It wasn't just the humiliation. It was the realization that they had never, not once, seen me as anything more than what they needed me to be. Nothing but a pawn in their perfect little game. I walked away without saying a word. There was no point in arguing. The kitchen was quiet, the sounds of laughter and music distant through the swinging doors. I found a corner where I could stand alone and eat the roll I had grabbed, my only solace. It was cold, dry, and tasteless, but in its dryness, there was something else. It was a symbol. It wasn't just food. It was a declaration of independence, one that no one could take away from me. As I chewed slowly, I found myself smiling. They didn't know it yet, but while they were dining on expensive meals and living in their world of shallow perfection, I was quietly building mine. While they had their champagne toasts and posed for photos, I was making decisions that would change everything. The notification on my phone buzzed, pulling me from my thoughts. It was from my broker confirming the closing documents for a commercial building across the street, the one where Aurora had bought her wedding dress. I hadn't mentioned it to anyone. It wasn't a big deal to them after all, but to me it was the start of something much bigger. While they lived in the illusion that they were superior, I was securing my future. And as I swallowed that cold roll, I realized that I wasn't just biding my time. I was positioning myself for something far more powerful than they could ever imagine. They thought they had broken me. They thought I was back there crying over my exclusion, but I wasn't. I was calculating, planning, and building my empire quietly, silently, and with every move they made, I was one step closer to showing them just how wrong they were. The drive up to Lake Tahoe had always been my sanctuary. The glass walls of the house overlooked the lake, perched high on a ridge, surrounded by tall pines that whispered in the wind. It was the one place where I could be myself, away from the chaos of my family and the constant noise of their expectations. But as I turned the final bend on the road leading to my home, something felt off. The SUV parked too close to the entrance caught my eye. It was an unfamiliar vehicle, and the way it was parked so aggressively close to the door made my stomach tighten. I didn't want to believe it, but something in me already knew this wasn't a coincidence. I pulled into the driveway, my eyes scanning the scene. The air was still the sky, painted with the soft hues of late afternoon. But the closer I got to the house, the more my sense of unease deepened. When I walked up the stone path to the front door, my keys were already in my hand. I had done this 100 times before, but this time, as I slid my key into the lock, something didn't feel right. The metal around the cylinder was jagged and raw, the key slipping in too easily like the lock had been forced open. I pulled the door open, and the silence of my retreat, the quiet sanctuary I had always sought here, was gone. Instead, the house was filled with noise. The blaring sound of a television echoed from the living room, a sharp contrast to the peaceful quiet I had left behind. I stepped inside, my heart racing. The room I had carefully curated, the one place that was truly mine, had been transformed. The familiar vintage leather armchairs I had spent years collecting were gone, replaced by a cheap sectional couch that didn't belong. My minimalist coffee table, the one I had spent weeks searching for, was nowhere to be found. Instead, there were piles of unopened boxes, as if someone had decided to just throw their things wherever they could. A pastel-colored crib stood in the corner of the room, and a changing table, haphazardly stacked with diapers, sat in the place where my favorite chair had once been. The whole scene was foreign jarring. It didn't feel like home. It felt like an invasion. Then, I saw her. Aurora was lying on that cheap sectional, her swollen belly on full display as she snacked on strawberries from a bowl I immediately recognized as mine. She didn't look at me with guilt or even surprise. No, she looked at me with annoyance, as if my presence was an inconvenience to her. "Oh, you're here," she said, popping another strawberry into her mouth, barely acknowledging me. "We were going to call you, but we've been so busy nesting. We figured you wouldn't mind." She paused, eyes narrowing with that unmistakable smugness. "You're hardly ever here anyway." It was as if my absence from this place had somehow justified their actions, as if it was their right to take over without even asking. To her, this was just another thing they could take from me without consequence. I didn't say anything. I didn't yell, didn't demand an explanation. I just walked past her, heading straight for the glass doors that led out to the deck. The cold air hit me the moment I stepped outside, a sharp contrast to the warmth of the living room. I glanced toward the corner of the deck, and my heart dropped. There, half covered in a drift of snow, were my things. My personal belongings, my books. My clothes were piled in a heap, exposed to the elements. And there, on top of everything, were my grandmother's journals. The ones I had cherished for years. The ones that held our family's history. Her wisdom. Everything I held dear. They were soaked, bloated with moisture, the leather warped, and the pages turned to pulp. I stood frozen, staring at the damage. The wind bit at my face, but I didn't feel it. All I could feel was a cold, searing anger that coursed through my veins. My grandmother's journals, the only inheritance I truly cared about, ruined, destroyed, because they needed space for a diaper genie. It was as if everything I had worked for, everything I had fought to preserve, had been torn apart. For a moment, everything inside me stilled. I felt the fury bubbling inside me, but it was quiet, controlled. I didn't scream. I didn't run back inside to confront them. Instead, I just stood there, feeling the wind against my face, the cold seeping into my bones. I could hear Aurora's voice faintly from inside, still talking to Julian as if nothing was wrong, as if they hadn't just destroyed something irreplaceable. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was how they hadn't even bothered to hide it. They hadn't even tried to pretend they were doing anything wrong. They simply believed they were entitled to everything, and I was nothing more than an obstacle. "Amelia, stop being dramatic," Aurora called out from the living room. Her voice was full of that sickly sweetness, the kind she used to manipulate to twist the knife. "Look, you're a 29-year-old spinster. What do you need a 5-bedroom house for? You're just hoarding things. We're doing you a favor." She rubbed her stomach like she was some kind of goddess, her pregnancy giving her a sense of immunity from any consequences. I turned to face them, then my mind already made up. I didn't scream. I didn't beg them to leave. I didn't ask why they thought they could do this. I simply pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed 911. "Address 440 Ridgeline Road," I said, my voice calm, devoid of any tremble. "I have intruders in my home. They've damaged the property and are refusing to leave." I hung up and looked at the scene in front of me. They hadn't broken me. Not today. Not anymore. The sound of the police arriving was a distant hum in the background, but to me, it was the beginning of something much bigger. Something they couldn't stop. The silence didn't last long. The sound of the police sirens grew louder, but before they could even pull into the driveway, my father, Lawrence, stormed onto the property. He slammed the car door shut with such force that I could feel the vibrations in the floor beneath me. I didn't move. I didn't even flinch. I just stood there, my phone still in my hand, my eyes locked on him as he made his way toward me. I could see the fury on his face, the tightness in his jaw, but what caught me off guard wasn't the rage. It was a smile. It was tight forced, but there was something in it that chilled me to the bone. It didn't reach his eyes. It was the smile of someone who thought they had already won. He stopped just a few feet in front of me, ignoring the police officers standing by, his eyes narrowing as he studied me. Then, without missing a beat, he spoke, his voice dripping with disdain. "You think you're smart, don't you?" He spat, his words cold and sharp. "You think a piece of paper makes this yours?" His finger jabbed toward the deed in my hand. The world seemed to pause for a moment. The anger that had been simmering inside me was threatening to boil over, but I kept my voice steady. "It is mine, Lawrence," I said calmly, the words coming out quieter than I intended, but every bit as forceful. "I bought it, I paid for it, and I'm the one pressing charges." His laugh was dry, cruel, like he was laughing at a joke I didn't understand. He took a step closer, the heat of his breath sending a ripple of unease through me. "You paid for it. What money, Amelia?" "The money you made flipping those first few apartments 8 years ago." I froze, a cold shiver running down my spine. The mention of those apartments, the first steps I had ever taken toward building something real, made my blood run cold. I knew where this was going. He was going to twist the truth. He was going to rewrite history to fit his narrative. He took another step closer, his eyes narrowing as he invaded my personal space. The officer took a step forward, his hand resting on his belt. But Lawrence didn't seem to notice. "You didn't have a job. You were a nobody. You got that money from me." He said, his voice growing louder with each word. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. This wasn't just about the house. This was about everything he had ever denied me. The childhood I had spent trying to earn his approval. The years I had spent proving myself only to have him tear it all down in a matter of seconds. I didn't respond right away. I knew what he was trying to do. He was trying to make me doubt myself, to make me question my own memory, to gaslight me into submission. But I wasn't going to let him. I met his gaze, my voice, low and steady. "You never gave me a dime." I said my words sharp, cutting through the air. "You told me I was on my own the day I turned 18. The words felt like a punch to the gut, but I held my ground, refusing to let him rewrite our shared history. "That is not how I remember it," he retorted, his voice rising in anger. "And that is not how the court will see it. We filed the paperwork this morning, Amelia. We're suing you for constructive trust." My heart skipped a beat. Constructive trust. The term was foreign to me, but I could see the malicious intent behind it. He was claiming that he had given me the money in good faith to hold on to on his behalf, that somehow everything I had earned, every risk I had taken, every sleepless night was his. He was trying to steal everything I had worked for. He was trying to erase me, to rewrite my story. I didn't show the shock that was rippling through me. I didn't show the panic that threatened to rise up from my chest. Instead, I kept my voice calm. "I didn't steal anything from you," I said, keeping my gaze locked on his. "You're lying, and I'm not going to let you get away with it." At that moment, Aurora's voice cut through the tension. She had stopped crying, her tear-streaked face morphing into a smug, victorious look. "Ideally," she said, as if everything had been a game all along, "we'll settle. Just sign over the deed and we'll drop the lawsuit. We might even let you visit the baby." It was like a slap to the face. They thought they could buy me off. They thought I was still the weak, quiet sister who would bow down to them. But I didn't flinch. I didn't falter. I stood there watching them, my heart pounding, but my resolve unshaken. "You really think I'm gonna give up this easily?" I asked, my voice colder now. "You really think I'm going to let you take everything I've built?" I looked at Lawrence, then at Aurora, then at Julian standing awkwardly in the background, trying to act like he wasn't involved. They were all so sure they had me cornered. They were so certain I was just a quiet girl who would be crushed by their lies. But they didn't understand. I wasn't weak. Not anymore. I had learned to play their game, and I was ready to turn it all back on them. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed 911, my voice steady as I spoke into the receiver. "Address 440 Ridgeline Road." I said my words, ringing out in the silence. "I have intruders in my home. They've damaged the property and are refusing to leave." I hung up and turned back to face them. The police were on their way, but it wasn't just the law I was counting on. It was my own resolve, my own strength. "You're not taking anything from me, Lawrence," I said quietly. "Not this time." The courtroom was a stark contrast to the chaos outside. The weight of the legal battle hung in the air, but I remained calm every step of the process, methodical and deliberate. My attorney, a man whose silence often spoke louder than most people's words, sat beside me, the binder of documents resting on the mahogany table. The weight of it wasn't just in the paper, it was in the truth. It contained a truth that would finally expose everything. I could feel Lawrence's eyes on me from across the room, his smugness still evident despite the looming defeat. Aurora, sitting next to him, was tearfully nodding along, but it was all a show. They had thought they were clever. They thought they had me cornered. But what they didn't know was that I had been playing my own game all along. The trial began with the usual back and forth. Lawrence, ever the manipulator, took the stand first. His voice was filled with conviction as he claimed that the $500,000 he had supposedly given me years ago was actually an investment, that I had been a nominee to hold the money for the family. It was a story he had rehearsed. It was a lie. But his words spoken under oath weren't as solid as he thought. My attorney stood and, with the calm precision that only he could manage, asked the most important question. "Mr. Lawrence, did you report this $500,000 as income?" There was a pause, a long, heavy pause. Lawrence shifted uncomfortably, then exploded. "It doesn't matter, that's not the issue here." But it was too late. My attorney had already dropped the bombshell. "Your Honor, the plaintiff has admitted under oath to $500,000 in unreported income." The courtroom fell silent as the realization hit. The confession was out in the open. Lawrence had just implicated himself in federal tax evasion. Aurora, who had been playing the victim for the entire trial, looked at me with a mix of desperation and disbelief. Her tears dried up as she processed the weight of what was happening. They had believed their lies would hold up. They thought they could rewrite the narrative, but I had been playing my cards quietly, methodically. While they were trying to pull the wool over everyone's eyes, I had already uncovered the truth. Then it was my turn. I took the stand, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the quiet one. I wasn't the one in the background. I stood there telling my side of the story, every detail, every lie they had told me. I wasn't angry. I didn't need to be. The truth had already done its work. The final blow came when we presented the evidence, a video I had recorded earlier that morning, just before the trial started. Aurora, confident she could manipulate the system, had been caught on tape, bragging about her plans to fake a medical issue to gain sympathy from the judge. The look on her face when the video played in court was priceless. The judge looked at her with utter disgust before ordering her arrest for perjury and contempt. The look on Lawrence's face as the reality of his situation set in was the last thing I saw before I walked out of the courtroom. He was defeated, not just legally, but personally. It wasn't just that I had won the case, it was that I had exposed them for who they really were. Their greed, their manipulation, all of it laid bare. They had tried to destroy me, but in the end, it was their own lies that had brought them down. As I stood there looking out over the Lake Tahoe horizon, I realized that this victory wasn't just about winning in court. It was about everything that had led me to this moment. The years of being overlooked, the years of silence, the years of being underestimated by those who were supposed to support me. Each of those moments had built the quiet strength within me. I had never been loud, never been flashy. I had been patient. I had been careful. And in the end, it was that quiet resolve that had carried me through. My family thought they could take everything from me, my home, my history, my hard-earned success. But they had underestimated me. They had underestimated the power of resilience. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Not just the legal weight, but the emotional weight that had been dragging me down for so long. I wasn't the same person who had walked into that room. I had fought for myself, and I had won not just the battle, but the right to take control of my own life. The house, the empire, the freedom, I had built it all, and it was mine. My story is a reminder that sometimes the loudest victories are the ones that happen in silence. When the world underestimates you, when they count you out, that's when you have the chance to show them what you're really made of. Don't ever let anyone tell you that you can't rise to the top, because if I can do it, so can you. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe, because there are more stories of underdogs rising, more tales of strength, resilience, and quiet victories. Stay tuned.